The topic for this evening isn't easy, especially for new people. So if there's new people who are attending this class, be patient because the topic is not easy. And at the same time, it's important. The topic of the universal form is the topic for this chapter. And the universal form makes its way into the Srimad Bhagavatam in a number of places, as it does in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 11. The Krishna reveals to Arjuna the universal form. And there are a number of different descriptions of the universal form. And there are a number of different experiences of those who have seen the universal form. So be patient, and we'll try to give an introduction, something of an overview of the topic, the universal form topic. Here we go. The image on the left side is Lord Brahma seated with various demigods, and they're by the shore of the ocean of milk. And in the background, that's Lord Vishnu lying on the bed of Anantashesh, being served by Lakshmi, and he's offering prayers to the personality of Godhead. This chapter, Canto 3, Chapter 6, requires some background, elementary understanding of the universal form, and Sankhya. Sankhya is the elements of matter and the elements of spirit and the analysis of the two. So as I said, this isn't going to be easy, but here we go. According to Vedic sources, there are three primary accounts of the universal form given in our scriptures. The first is those that are directly perceived, just like Arjuna perceived the universal form, or Mother Yasoda, when she looked in the mouth of Krishna, she saw the form of the universe within Krishna's mouth or within his belly. And the second is not directly experienced or perceived, but it's heard. And there are several of those mentioned already, found in Srimad Bhagavatam. That's what this image is. It's Shukadeva Goswami speaking Srimad Bhagavatam to Maharaj Parikshit and to the sages who are in the assembly there. And then there's a third that you saw in the initial slide, the imagined universal form. And there are different ideas of what the imagined universal form is. So we're going to be focusing on the second category. The Srimad Bhagavatam is a authoritative description through sound depiction, and not just the universal form, but Vedic cosmology. Vedic cosmology is found in Canto 5, and for your entertainment, with the microphone by this little speaker here, I'd like to play for you the devotee. It's down here. Hold it by the speaker. There's a devotee who's in charge of the Temple of Vedic Planetarium. The Temple of Vedic Planetarium is going to be constructed in Mayapur, and he's the narrating voice. His name is Antardweep. So here we go. I hope technology works.
Planetary display, we have Shesha holding up the earth. This is Shesha, the empowered incarnation. There we have Ananta speaking Bhagavatam to the four Kumaras, and above the 7 subterranean planets. Here we can see Jambudweep, the central island of Bhumandala, and Bharatvarsha is situated on the southern side of that. It's 8 other Varshas, with Ilavrita Varsha in the center, various supporting mountains with large trees upon them, described in Srimad Bhagavatam. In the very center of Ilavrita Varsha is Mount Meru, Golden Mountain. Atop Mount Meru are the cities of important demigods, Lord Brahma in the center, the 8 Dikpalas in the cardinal directions and sub-directions. Moving out, we can see the broader Bhumandala, 7 concentric islands and oceans surrounding them. The 7th of these islands is Pushkaradweep. On that island is Manasotra mountain. On the mountain there's various cities of demigods such as Indra. Out further is the Lokaloka mountain. These large elephants stand atop Lokaloka mountain to balance Bhumandala. Outside of Lokaloka mountain is Aloka Varsha, which is dark. The rays of the sun and the other luminaries extend up to Lokaloka mountain. On Manasotra mountain here on Pushkara Dweep, the sun travels above this mountain at the southernmost point of its annual orbit. Above Bhumandala is Bhuvarloka, which is the residence of the Charanas, Siddhas, Yakshas, Gandharvas. And above there is Swargaloka, beginning from the sun and extending up to the pole star Dhruvaloka.
Go full screen.
This is the moving part of the planetary display. Here we can see the sun and the moon moving in their chariots. The chariots are being drawn by horses moving in the anti-clockwise direction, but they're traveling with the wheel of time moving in the clockwise direction faster. So it looks as if they're moving backwards. Above them are the zodiac of stars, more planets, and another realm of stars. So here we can see everything moving with the Kala Chakra, circumambulating the axis that connects Mount Meru with Dhruvaloka. Above these planets, we come to the planet of the 7 sages, the Saptarshi. You can see them here, they're commonly known as the Big Dipper, and then Dhruvaloka, the pole star. On the ocean of milk situated there, Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, who is the Paramatma within everyone's heart, he resides on Anantashesh. Moving up beyond there, we have Mahaloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, Satyaloka. In this video, we haven't included many of the details for there, but on Mahaloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, we have residences of the Lord, such as Lord Varaha, Lord Vamana, and so on. Here's Brahmaloka, and on Brahmaloka, we also have a form of the Lord Garbhodakshaya Vishnu as the Sahasrashesha Purush. Beyond there is the 7 coverings of the universe, earth, water, fire, etc. And outside of the universes is the abode of Lord Shiva, Shiva Loka. There he resides eternally. Beyond Shiva Loka, we come to Mahavishnu, Karanodakashaya Vishnu, with innumerable universes that are emanating from the pores of his transcendental body. Here you can see him being served by Rama Devi. Then we come to the Brahmajyoti, the effulgence of the Lord's transcendental body. Penetrating through the Brahmajyoti, we come to the Vaikuntha planets. We're showing 24 planets of the Vaikuntha realm in this model. The Lord with 4 arms is holding the conch, disc, club, and lotus, and the various combinations of those 4 make 24. Then we come to Goloka Vrindavan. Here we can see Radha Madhava, and we'll also be showing the other primary rasas, Krishna with the cowherd boys, Krishna being served, Krishna with Mother Yashoda. So this is an overview of the planetary display to be shown in the main dome of the temple.
Fascinating, huh? That was an attempt by the director of the Temple of Vedic Planetarium to show us the structure of the universe, or Vedic cosmology, as it's found in Srimad Bhagavatam. Here's a two-dimensional depiction. There's one universe. We saw one universe, the inside, and then beyond the universe is the coverings of the universe and so forth. You look closely, and you'll see the 7 lower planetary systems. You'll see the Earth globe. That's part of Bhumandala. And then above Bhumandala, as mentioned, Bhuvarloka, Svargaloka, and so forth. Brahmaloka is at the very top. And there's many things in between. So all of that is depicted in the 5th canto Srimad Bhagavatam. And now we're going to take a look at the fact that Vedic cosmology is the universal form. You ready? The universal form is Vedic cosmology. Vedic cosmology is the universal form. Here's the very first chapter of Canto 5, describing the universal form, reads this way. When the mind is fixed upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead in its external feature, made of the material modes of nature, the gross universal form, the mind is brought to the platform of pure goodness. In that transcendental position, one can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, who in his subtler form is self-effulgent and beyond the modes of nature. O my Lord, subtler means subtler than the gross, subtler than the universal form is the Vasudeva form, the spiritual form. O my Lord, please describe vividly how that form, that spiritual form, which covers the entire universe, is perceived. Excuse me, that form is the gross Virat Rupa. That's how the Vedic cosmology begins, stating it is the universal form. And at the very end of this whole section comes chapter 26, 11 chapters later. The end of the chapter reads, Shukadeva Goswami speaking, My dear king, I have now described for you this planet Earth, other planetary systems, and their lands, or varshas, rivers and mountains. I have also described the sky, the oceans, the lower planetary systems, the directions, the hellish planetary systems, and the stars. These constitute the Virata Rupa, the gigantic material form of the Lord. That's the universal form. And we're speaking about this because that's what Canto 3, Chapter 6 is about. This is just a more elaborate description of what we're going to be discussing this evening. So this Virat Rupa, gigantic form, on which all living entities repose. In case you didn't know, we're reposed, or we're resting upon that universal form. Thank you. Yes, go full screen. Can you go full screen? Because, yeah, thanks. Thus I have explained the wonderful expanse of the eternal body of the Lord, universal form. So from beginning to end, Canto 5, Vedic cosmology is universal form, universal form, universal form, universal form. And we're discussing the universal form. Now, question. Why is the universal form given such prominence in Srimad Bhagavatam? I mean, Krishna's pastime, fantastic. Universal form? Give me a break. It's too complicated. Let's go to pastimes, please. So here's a response to that question. By remembering the Lord through his universal form, it assists us to get the proper perspective on his spiritual form. Here is Prabhupada's writing. The materially absorbed mind, in case you happen to have a materially absorbed mind, of the conditioned soul does not allow one to transcend the limit of the bodily conception. Contemplation of the universal form gives one opportunities to think of the Supreme Lord. In order to facilitate thoughts of transcendence, one may fix their mind on the external feature of the Lord. Note, there's a meditator with his back to us, or her back to us, and they're meditating on, there's that universal form right in the middle, to approach transcendence. By doing so, the potencies of the Lord are understood to be manifestations of transcendence, and with this realization, one advances to the next step. And gradually, the stage of full realization becomes attainable. Now that's Prabhupada's explanation from Canto 2, Chapter 1, that gets its prominence in the whole chapter, universal form. Now let's go to the end of Canto 5, Chapter 26. Here's Shukadeva Goswami. In the beginning, second and third cantos, Bhagavatam, I have already described how one can progress on the path of liberation. In the Puranas, the vast universal existence, which is like an egg divided into 14 parts, is described. This vast form is considered the external body of the Lord, created by his energy and qualities. It is generally called the Virat Rupa. If one reads the description of this external form of the Lord with great faith, or if one hears about it and explains it to others to propagate Bhagavad Dharma or Krishna consciousness, his faith and devotion in spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, will gradually increase. Note, this is Shukadeva Goswami. Although developing this consciousness is very difficult, by this process one can purify himself and gradually come to an awareness of the supreme absolute truth. That's text 38. And now comes text 39. Again, Shukadeva Goswami speaking. One who is interested in liberation, who accepts the path of liberation, and is not attracted to the path of conditional life, is called yati, or a devotee. Such a person should first control his mind by thinking of Virat-rupa, the gigantic universal form of the Lord, and then gradually think of the spiritual form of Krishna, Satchitananda Vigraha, after hearing of both forms. Thus one's mind is fixed in samadhi. By devotional service, one can then realize the spiritual form of the Lord, which is the destination of devotees. Thus his life becomes successful. So all of that's in response to why is this given such prominence in the Bhagavatam. It helps us get to the Satchit Ananda, spiritual form of Krishna, meditation. It helps. Supposing your mind gets boggled with all of this universal form stuff, because we're going to launch into it very shortly, just continue to hear it with faith that it's Krishna's form, although temporary, and it will help you get a distinction between his spiritual and his universal form. Now, we're ready for Canto 3, Chapter 6. Within this Virat description or narration of Chapter 6, there's 3 sections. The first section is the awakening of the Hiranmaya, or the universal form. We'll hear about it. This is just a preview of where we're going next. Then there's description of this universal form as manifestations of the 3 modes, and thus upper, middle, lower planetary systems. The Virat displays those. And then finally, the Varnas, the head, arms, belly, and legs of the universal form. It's all described in this chapter. So now what we're going to do is go back a little bit to chapter 5 and see how does 5 bridge into chapter 6. Because I wasn't with you last week, but some of you were present for last week's description of chapter 5. And chapter 5 ends with the Devatas offering prayers to Vishnu to enable them to perform their universal function prior to the universe or the universal form being manifest. So I hope a little light just went on, because I'm going to turn the switch again. Who are these demigods in chapter 5? Because the universe hasn't manifest yet. So there's no demigods to be ruling over within the universe. Who are those personalities? I was hoping you would ask that question. So here's the answer. And we're going to go to 3.5.38 purport. The presiding deities of elements, such as Mahat Tattva, are called portions of Vishnu, since they function for Maya Shakti. They are the forms of time or transformation, the forms of Maya, or emotions such as deliberation, joy, or sorrow, and the form of consciousness, Anksha Lingana. Because of not having relationship with each other, nanatvat, the elements are unable to create the universe. They began praising the Lord. This is not from BBT. This is Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur's commentary, by the way. So if you go to that place in your Srimad Bhagavatam, you won't find what I'm just reading. By the inconceivable will of the Lord, they suddenly possessed all senses and bodies. So they didn't even yet possess bodies, because there's no universe. So who are these presiding deities of the elements? The elements are there, but they're not structured yet. There's no universe, and there's no forms of demigods to organize those elements into a universe. So who are those devas? I hope you understand the question. So now let's see if we can understand the answer to that question. We're still on chapter 5. We didn't even launch yet in chapter 6. Some of you may have been attending the prayers of Brahma, Canto 10, chapter 14. Brahma is offering prayers to Krishna after that whole incident of stealing the calves and cowherd boys and putting them in a cave. If you haven't attended that, I'm going to remind you that in those prayers of Brahma, Brahma speaks about the presiding deities of the senses. And he indicates that the residents of Vrindavan do not require presiding deities of the senses because their bodies are all spiritual. But wait a minute. What? We're dependent. So who are they dependent upon? Because we're dependent entities. Even perfected souls are dependent entities. Who are they dependent upon? They're dependent upon Krishna. Well, Krishna's not overburdened with looking after so many entities. He has expansions. These demigods spoken of in chapter 5 are expansions of the presiding deities, demigods, in the spiritual world. What? Say that again? In the spiritual world, Krishna has expansions. And those expansions of him in the spiritual world oversee the senses of the living entities in the spiritual world. Because we're dependent. We're not independent. You become liberated doesn't mean, okay, I have no one to answer to. I'm independent. I'm God. No such thing. We're dependent in the spiritual realm as well. Here's, for your listening pleasure, this is Jiva Goswami's commentary on 10.14.33. You'll find 10.14.33 in your Bhagavatam, because most of you have Bhagavatam in your home, right? And if you don't, you should get a Bhagavatam set in your home. Here's 10.14.33, 10.14.33 commentary. The eternal devatas, right? Eternal devatas. They're in Krishna Loka or they're in the spiritual realm. Eternal devatas situated around the Lord in the spiritual sky. Those deities of the spiritual world are empowered by the Lord. The Padma Purana says, quote, the heavenly beings, those are the ones we know, presiding deities of the universe. The heavenly beings such as Sadyas, Maruts, Vishwadevas, and their abodes are all eternal in the spiritual world. In the material world, these same devatas are not eternal. And Sanatana Goswami comments in the same verse, 10.14.33, although the people of Vraja, with bodies of eternity, knowledge, and bliss, have devatas of the senses, they are not the material moon deity, etc. Over there on the left-hand side of the image, you see the moon deity, that's Chandra. They don't preside over the residents of Vrindavan because they have spiritual forms. These deities, the deities that preside over the Braja devotees, the perfected souls, senses, these deities also have spiritual bodies and live in Vaikuntha. Brahma makes the statement by thinking of the senses of the sense deities as non-different from the Vaikuntha forms. Why? Because the world, the demigods of heaven, they're shadow forms of the spiritual forms. Say that again? Sure. Everything in this created realm is a reflection of the spiritual realm. There's spiritual forms in the spiritual realm. There's material forms in the material realm, and the material forms are reflections of the spiritual forms, including the sense deities, including the spiritual forms of the sense-controlling personalities for the perfected souls. The ones in the material world are not those. They're shadow forms. And then it becomes the Padma Purana verse. Here's the whole Sanskrit, if you want. Nitya sarve pare damni ye chanye Three Divakasau, etc. The heavenly beings, such as Satyas, Maruts, Vishvadevas, and their abodes are all eternal in the spiritual world. In the material world, these same devatas are not eternal. So, who are these people in chapter 5? They're presiding deities of the elements. But mind you, the elements are still in a subtle form. They're not fully manifest in the universe itself, and they're not connecting with one another. So they can't do their thing. They can't do their service. So at the end of chapter 5 of Canto 3, they offer prayers. And then chapter 6 begins. Chapter 6 begins with Vishnu hearing their prayers. He entered into the 23 elements, along with his external energy, Kali. So some of you may be from Bengal, and you know who Kali is. So in the commentary, your BBT explanation, Prabhupada's commentary, he explains this external energy comes with the Supreme Lord and enters into the elements and enlivens the elements to the point where they can actually function together. The unifying function together factor is Vishnu. And he acts through his energies, specifically by name. Kali is mentioned. It's mentioned in the purport. It's not mentioned in the verse, but that's Prabhupada's purport. So now we have Garbhodakshay Vishnu pictured here at the bottom. Now there isn't a universe yet, but when Vishnu enters into the elements, then the Virat arises, like from slumber to becoming awake. The universal form is aroused by contact with Vishnu within the elements. And so as we go along with the rest of chapter 6, the universal form arose, and then different things started to happen as the universal form arose. And it mentions there's 3 divisions. The one, that's the Atma, or Atmas plural. The 10, that's knowledge acquiring senses, working senses. And the 3, here's the 3, that's consciousness. Here we go. What the 3 represents, this is straight from purport. Consciousness is divided into 3 modes of self-identification according to the proportion of purity, and the lower is at the bottom and the higher is at the end. The lower is at the beginning. Adhyatmika, self-identification with body and mind. Adibhautika, self-identification with the material products. And Adidaivika, or self-identification as a servant of the Lord. Those are the 3. So the universal form manifests in the 1, the 10, and the 3. You can read the chapter so you get it a little more carefully and a little more detailed, but this is the summary of the universal form is being aroused by Vishnu entering within the elements, because the yet to be manifest controllers of the elements have prayed to Vishnu, help. We can't do our service. Help. So he enters. And then the universal form starts to manifest in these ways. Of these 3, Adidaivika, self-identification is the beginning of purity of consciousness in pursuance of the desires of the Lord. So there's a chronological sequence of the unfolding of the universal form, because in the spiritual world there's no influence of time, but in the material world there is. Next comes the presiding deities of the senses manifest. So there was the subtle deities that were offering prayers, and now the physical forms of those deities are going to manifest in the universal form. And so here they are. Agni presides over the organ of speech. Nice graphics. Varuna presides over the sense of taste. The Ashvinis preside over the smell sensation. This is described right in this chapter 6. Surya presides over the sense of sight. Now these are evolving one after the next. So the senses can do what they're supposed to do, but they need presiding deities, and the presiding deities need the integrating factor of Vishnu, who they serve. Anila or Vayu presides over the sense of touch. The Dig Devatas, or the Dig Devatas, they preside over the auditory sense. If you remember in that video that we saw going up that Mount Sumeru, or Mount Meru, the golden mountain in the middle, at the very top, this kind of plateau, flat space, and Brahma's abode is in the center, and there's 8 other abodes. Those are the abodes of the Dig Devatas. As he said, the 4 cardinal directions and subdirections. So north, south, east, west, and then the subdirections: northeast, southeast, subdirections. That makes 8. Those are the Dig Devatas. They have a place in the universal form. They're on top of Mount Meru. And they are in charge of, they preside over the auditory sense. Now, there's 2 terminologies. Dig, what does dig mean? Yeah, direction. And so there's controllers of the directions, and there's protectors of the directions. And there's the list, and I don't expect you to remember the list. But this is taken from the scriptures. There's many things to say, but I'm going to move along. And then, because now we're still going through chapter 6, Indra is the deity presiding over the hands. The presiding deity of movement or legs is Lord Vishnu. Elsewhere it says it's Vamana. He has very expandable legs. Vamana. So he's in the Vishnu Tattva category. So he's very special amongst the controllers of the senses. Lord Brahma is the presiding deity of intelligence. That's good news. And the moon is the presiding deity of the mind. We're almost done. We can't go anywhere without false ego. So Lord Shiva is the presiding deity of false ego. So this is what's described in chapter 6. There's some additional personalities in charge of other senses. Here's a little description. Prajapati is presiding deity of the organ of reproduction. Mitra presides over both organs of evacuation. And in chapter 6, it mentions some other things. The touch and itching sensation. It doesn't give any controlling deity in Prabhupada's purport. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, or writes, the air that flows through the body, prana that's within the body, is the deity of touch, prana, and the controlling deity of the hairs is Oshadya, that causes itching sensation, perception. So that's the controlling deities become manifest. That's described in chapter 6. Now we have two more features in chapter 6. What are they? The three modes are manifest through it in the form of the three planetary systems. That's just, you can see it depicted in the image here. And then finally, the four varnas. You know, we're all familiar with the four varnas. The head, arms, so the universal form, head, arms, torso, leg. The universal form manifests the four varnas. The universal form manifests the three planetary systems. The universal form manifests the controlling deities of the senses and the elements that they're perceiving. All of this manifests from the Virat. And I hope you're happy because we're almost done. One of the concluding portions of this chapter 6, almost, and this is now spoken by, who's speaking chapter Canto 3? Who knows? Who's speaking Canto 3? Maitreya. Maitreya? Okay. Maitreya is speaking. Maitreya is speaking. And he's speaking to Vidura. And Maitreya says, basically, I'm doing the best I can because this is really unlimited. The original poet Brahma, after mature meditation for 1,000 celestial years, could know only that the glories of the Supreme Soul are inconceivable. Then he began saying, I've just done the best I can because it's unlimited. And even for Brahma, it's inconceivable. So I'm giving you what I've heard from authorities. Now, Canto 3, Chapter 6 has many of the very same sets of sequences as Chapter 26. What's Chapter 26? It's Kapila Dev's teachings on Sankhya philosophy. Remember at the very beginning I said you need to know something. What's Sankhya philosophy? Who knows what Sankhya philosophy is? You know what Sankhya philosophy is? No idea. Sankhya, it's in Bhagavad Gita. Sankhya is in Bhagavad Gita. Look, you have Bhagavad Gita somewhere in your house. So you can, in chapter 2, text 39, 2.39, Krishna says, thus far I have described Sankhya, now I'm going to describe Buddha Yoga. So it's Sankhya. Here's matter, here's spirit, and we belong to categories of spirit. That's Sankhya. Sankhya literally means to count. And so later we find in chapter 7, there's 8 separated material energies, right? 8. Let's count them. Earth, water, fire, air, ether. That's 5. Mind, intelligence, false ego. That's 3. 3 plus 5 is 8. So that's the categories of matter. And over here, there's categories of spirit. We belong to the category of spirit. That's Sankhya. In the Sankhya section of Canto 3, Chapter 26, some very, very similar depiction is given. Including further detail about the role of the demigods in this unfolding of the universe, and specifically the demigod's dependence on Paramatma. to perform their specific function. So guess what? They also offer prayers, help, and Paramatma enters, and then they can do their thing. We can't do anything without Paramatma, or with Paramatma. We are capable of whatever Paramatma permits us to do. We're dependent. That's good news, and it's reality. And here's a small detail. I mean, it's an important detail, but in the description of the deities controlling various senses, many of them are the same, but some of them are different. We're having in our discussion this morning, in the morning Bhagavatam class. One acharya says this, another acharya says that, we get puzzled. Well, here's one person, Srimad Bhagavatam speaker, Shukadeva Goswami, saying, here's the controlling deities of the senses, and over there is the same canto, different, slightly different list of controllers of the senses. What? I told you it'd be a little challenging. But if you read Srimad Bhagavatam, please read Srimad Bhagavatam carefully, and you'll find things like this as you go along, which is just fine. So in Canto 3, chapter 26, there was a place where the universal form was asleep, and they tried waking him up, and this demigod tried this, and that demigod tried that, and no good, nothing happened. They prayed to Vishnu, and then good news, Supersoul manifest. It describes there, chapter 26, Supersoul sometimes is called Antaryami, or the soul within, or Vasudeva, who manifests in pure consciousness, or Kshatragya, the knower of the field, and so forth. Known by different names, Supersoul enters, and the Virat becomes aroused. Here's the verse. When the inner controller, the deity presiding over consciousness, along with the Chitta, entered the heart of the universal form with reason, at that very moment, the cosmic being, the Virat Rupa, arose from the causal waters. Yay! And as you can see, it's the very end of chapter 26, which is the same thing that happened at the very end of chapter 6. They're slightly different in some further details in 26, but the same principle. And I was given a challenge. Can you give a class on Canto 3, chapter 6? So I accepted the challenge, and this is the result. So if you're a little perplexed, don't worry. You can go back and read it half a dozen times and get some sense of how this works. But it's the universal form. And once again, the universal form, this is a BBT illustration, one of them. And the universal form is where we are. We're situated on the form of the universe. We're situated in a certain part of that form of the universe in the mid-region, in Bhuloka, or Bhumandala, or the earthly realm. But the earthly realm is in this region, and then there's higher and then there's lower regions of the universal form. And just to repeat from this chapter 6, there's also the 4 varnas. Head, arms, torso, legs of the universal form. And we're somewhere in that configuration. And the upper, middle, lower planetary systems. And there's demigods that are controllers of this universe that we're within, and we're influenced by them. We're controlled by them. Now the good news is we're eternally controlled, but we can be controlled by Krishna instead of the material demigods. And we heard just this morning yesterday morning, whatever it was. Those who take full shelter, this is Uddhava Gita. Uddhava Gita? Uddhava Gita. You know Uddhava Gita, right? You know who? Uddhava? Uddhava, Krishna's dear friend. Uddhav? Uddhav? Okay. Uddhav. Uddhava. Krishna tells Uddhava that when you become Krishna conscious, you become fixed upon me and detached, then the demigods, they don't cause any obstacles for you. We certainly know what obstacles feel like. And they keep changing from one thing to another thing, but there's always something. And for those who become fixed in Krishna consciousness, those obstacles are taken away. Now, it doesn't mean, anyway, we discussed this topic this morning. So we want to get under the control of Krishna and this understanding, to some degree at least, the understanding of the universe in which we find ourselves and its relationship with Krishna is important. So that's our topic. Canto 3, Chapter 6. A little complicated, right? Yeah, I think so. Me too. But I tried to just present what the chapter says. That was the assignment. Okay, so you have something?
Guru Maharaj, we normally hear of Adhyatmika, Adibhautika, and Adidaivika as the three miseries. And in this chapter, they're presented.
The term is the same, but the application of the term is different. So for those of you that are listening and not familiar with what the question is, we're very accustomed to hearing Srila Prabhupada describe the kleshas, or sufferings, of the body and the mind, sufferings caused by other living entities, sufferings caused by natural disturbances. You know, like how cold it is in Chicago right now, or hurricane, or something, flood, something, tornado, something. Natural disturbances. That's what. So that's adibhautika. Adidaivika. Miseries. So aside from the application of those terms, you'll find them also in Bhagavad Gita, and they're used slightly differently than how they're found in this chapter. In this chapter, it's spoken of in terms of consciousness. They're forces that influence lower, in between, and higher consciousness. Adidaivika is closest to Krishna consciousness. It's a mode of goodness manifestation. You want me to go back to that slide?
So is there any relation between the miseries and the perception of these as modes of sense identification?
Yeah, it has to do with the adjective. The application of the adjective is one. In one case, it's this. The application of the adjective in another case is that. Of the body, that's one. And then more subtle, the mind. And then the devas. So the adjective applies differently according to the situation, the application of the situation. Sanskrit's like that. Yes, there's a relationship, but the relationship is connected to the application. I probably got everybody baffled, so there's probably no questions at all. Anything online? Really? Okay. Oh boy. Okay.
So this is from Paramakaruna Prabhu. Innumerable universes come out from the pores of Mahavishnu,
Yes.
who's sleeping in the Karbadak ocean.
No. The
Whereas
causal ocean.
Antardvip Prabhu's model shows Mahavishnu beyond Shivaloka
Yes.
is emanating universes.
Yes.
How to reconcile these two statements?
No problem. There's no contradiction to reconcile. He's in the causal ocean. Shivaloka, where he said, where he eternally resides, is not in the causal ocean, but it's beyond the coverings of the universe. What's that? There's nothing to reconcile. It's just a different tattva, and therefore there's a different abode. And if, because you like to read a lot, Paramakruna, I suggest you read Brihat Bhagavatamrita, and you'll find when Gopakumar passes through the 7 coverings of the universe, one after the next, that's quite a journey. He encounters the form of Brahman drawing him, and then he, chants his mantra and it goes away. It happens several times. And then he gets to Shivaloka. So it's on the other side of the coverings of the universe, but it's before he gets to the abode of Mahavishnu. Or another place you can read is towards the very end of Canto 10, where Krishna and Arjuna are getting in a chariot to go find the sons of the Brahmana that disappeared from Dwarka, but Krishna knows where they are. And you read that section, and it's also fascinating. It's not something we hear a lot about, Paramakaruna, so you're not going to find abundant references. So just rely on the little references that we have, and understand that Shivaloka is different than Kailash, because Kailash is within the universe, in the heavenly realm. And there's multiple abodes of Lord Shiva because he just has different abodes. And so one of them, the eternal abode of Shiva, is Shivaloka, and it's on this side of the causal ocean. It's not within the causal ocean where Mahavishnu is. So your discerning capacity will probably not be satisfied hearing what I just said, but just read it again and again and try your best to be peaceful hearing what the scripture says.
Sure. I understand, Maharaj. Thank you for explaining. Sorry, a follow-up question is that initially when Lord Narayana is emanating the universes from his core, is it doing from his Mahavishnu Loka above the Shiva planet, or is it doing from the ocean?
Narayan doesn't emanate universes. Mahavishnu emanates universes.
Yeah, but Antardeep Prabhu's picture was depositing that the universes are coming out from the pores of Narayana over there.
No.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, you're wrong. Okay. Anything else? Yes.
Guru Maharaj, in the beginning you were sharing why we study the universal form.
Why Srimad Bhagavatam gives such prominence to?
And there was the description that, first we think of the universal form and then think of Krishna. Helps us get to Satchidananda meditation.
Yes.
I'm
It's detachment from matter, essentially.
And is that true of the process that Prabhupada has given us? I mean, it seems
Those words are taken directly from Prabhupada's purports. Now, Prabhupada didn't give enormous emphasis. But I was not saying what should you do. I was saying why is the Srimad Bhagavatam given such prominence? Now, introducing Krishna Bhakti to the world, Prabhupada didn't give significant emphasis to that, nor do we. So, okay, then why is it there? Here's why it's there. Something? Go ahead.
There are a couple more from Parma Karuna Prabhu, but I'm going to ask some of some others as well. This is from Amara Mataji. Like most intelligent, most qualified personality is chosen for becoming Lord Brahma. Are there any qualifications for other demigods to be given different responsibilities for controlling the different senses?
Well, the answer is obvious. Specifically, what qualification, if you wanted to become this deva or that deva, what school do you have to go to? What qualifications do you have to meet to get that post? I've never come across anything like that. But they're highly devoted, highly theistic in conduct, and they have some tendency to want to be controllers. But specifically, I've never come across anything that says there may be something. There may be something, but I don't know what it is.
This is from Radhika Kasturi. She asks, when does Jiva Shakti come into play?
The Jiva Shakti is the one. In the manifesting of the universal form, there was the 1 and the 10 and the 3. So you can go to the purport and read about there's 2 or 3 verses that speak of the 1, and you'll find that's where Atma comes, the Jiva Shakti.
This question is from Barbara Stifel. How can I move my level of consciousness from Adi Bhautika to Adi Bhautika? Perhaps she meant Adi Bhautika to Adi Devika, which is the more purified.
Okay. Well, Sri Radhika asked a related question. Our process, the bhakti process, is simple. This information is there because the Vedas contain all knowledge, and part of knowledge is to understand how the universe functions, although we don't have to know how it functions because we just do our service. But there is this knowledge of how the universe functions. So a simple answer to how to move from the Adi Bhautika to Adi Daivika consciousness is the sadhana bhakti. Rise early in the morning, take your bath, chant your mantra, worship your deity, cook for Krishna, offer to Krishna, take Krishna prasadam, hear the scriptures. So you do sadhana bhakti. And that process of sadhana bhakti has power to relieve you of the Adi Bhautika consciousness, the bodily conception. Read Bhagavad Gita carefully, try to live by it, and follow sadhana bhakti nicely, and you'll get elevated. That's how. And keep good association. Something else.
So she actually sent a correction. How can I move my level of consciousness from Adhyatmika to Adi Bhautika?
Okay. Name.
You want to do questions 2 and 3 from Parma Karuna?
Well, if there's nothing else,
And then we have another question from Amar Mataji as well.
let's go to Parma Karuna, one of his two.
Okay.
Pick the best one.
But I'll try.
Great soul, great soul.
Srimad Bhagavatam 3.8.15, Vishwachakri Thakur says, Brahma previously merged with Narayana in sleep. When the Lord woke up, the lotus came out. The gross form is the universal form of the Lord called Vairaja, the gross form. Vishwachakri Thakur states it's a gross form of Brahma. There is a subtle form of the Lord called Hiranyagarbha. Again, Vishwachakri Thakur is stating Hiranyagarbha is a form of Brahma.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt. Parma Karuna, this is the Sunday program, and you're at, 301 or 401 scripture study. So I think you can send that question to me if you like, and privately I can respond as best I can. But I don't think that's so good for a Sunday program. Thank you for your patience.
Maramataji's second question. I'm contemplating how this knowledge about universal form leads to transcendental understanding of the Lord. Can you kindly explain?
Yeah, really simple. In really simple terms. Detachment, attachment. Understand the material conception looks like this, and the spiritual conception looks like that, and we belong to the spiritual realm. It's Sankhya, manifest in the universal form, in Krishna's spiritual form. Detachment, attachment. That's the benefit of that process. We don't adhere to that process so much. We're encouraged to understand it because it's there several times in the Bhagavatam. But that's the principle behind that explanation. I mean, they say the same thing a little bit differently. At the end of Canto 1, there's a description, there's a question by Maharaj Parikshit to Shukadev Goswami. Basically, how can I elevate my consciousness because I'm about to die? And the first entry point is the universal form, and then Paramatma, and then pure devotional service. So there's a sequence, and that's an important, that's the first speaking that Shukadev Goswami does in the whole of the Bhagavatam, and it appears again and appears again. So it's not unimportant. But it's not our primary process. The essence is detachment and attachment, spiritual attachment. That's the principle. Srila Prabhupada ki. Yasodanandana, take it away.
Thank you so much for giving that presentation. It certainly was a complex chapter, but I appreciate how you tried to make it digestible. So thank you so much for that. And then next week, we will be having a presentation by His Grace Sankarshan Prabhu, who will be taking us through the 7th chapter of the 3rd canto. Hare Krishna.
You've got an extra head there. Srila
Yes,
Prabhupada ki jai.